Deliberately did that because there's a lecture on Wednesday on the Quran itself that would focus on that. And what I want to do is really focus on something that I think is a primary attribute of God, which is mercy and compassion and love. So I spoke about how God wants to free you from this. Now, if you want to get a little bit into detail about who God is in Islam, it's essentially He is transcendent. As the Quran says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. For example, if I were to create this water bottle, I don't become the water bottle, right? He is powerful, as we mentioned. He's loving, He's compassionate, He has a number of names and attributes. But I think the cool thing is that differentiates Islam with other spiritual traditions is very simple. It's what I would call a purified form of monotheism, which is in line with our natures, as we discussed something about the nature of ourselves and acknowledging this transcendent being. So without getting into too much argumentation, Quran says clearly, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Say, God is uniquely one. He is self-sufficient. He begets not, nor was He begotten, and there is nothing like unto Him. Now these principles which you can understand in the English language actually filters out most spiritual traditions in my humble view. For example, Buddhism doesn't have a foot in the door because it doesn't really acknowledge the divine as a reality that should be discussed. Take for instance Hinduism. Some forms of Hinduism, they have this concept of pantheism. God is within the universe, which I would argue is counter to our reason. Take even contemporary forms of Christianity. Christianity, a certain conception of Christian theology says that Jesus, upon whom be peace, had a center of consciousness and He had a human nature and a divine nature. I find that problematic for rational spiritual reasons. I don't think it's in line with the majesty of God. I don't think it's in line with reason per se. It might be logical. You could define it mathematically, but I don't think it's reasonable. Because, I mean, you're doing medicine, I don't want to offend anybody, but if someone has two natures that are quite distinct, there's a term for that. Yeah? So from that perspective, and obviously we don't have time to get into a huge discussion about this, but I would say just by looking at the 112th chapter on the Quran, it becomes a filter for most spiritual traditions. And I'm saying this from a humble way because Islam doesn't claim it has a monopoly on the truth. I mean, if Muslims come across that way, then that's wrong. We just claim we have an unbroken chain of narration. That's all we're saying. That's all we're saying. We're saying we're just the right conception. Other traditions talked about oneness. Most traditions talked about oneness. But they got it wrong somewhere. Like even the Jewish tradition, if you study the Talmud, you see, for example, rabbinical sayings almost become like a source of revelation. For us, that's a form of polytheism. That's why the Quran says, have you seen those who take the monks and rabbis as their lords? Because what they say now is almost like a divine authority. We can't accept that. Because that is associating divinity to anything other than God. So the point is, when you do a critical analysis on all spiritual traditions, in my humble view, if you believe monotheism in this form to be pure and part of your nature, and you use these principles from the 112th chapter in the Quran, then you would see that the most reasonable and loving and natural decision is to say, I'm going to worship the God that deserves to be worshipped, which is the one that has sole divinity and it's not shared with anything or anyone else. So that would be my view. And that's summarize. And actually, to be honest, that's all you need. And that's the seed for you. And if that seed is planted, it's up to God to water that seed or not, via His wisdom and His mercy. So I hope that helps, John.